Hello and welcome to week 5 of the course. So the course is 2/3 of the way over when you're starting your work on week 5, or maybe close to 2/3 of the way over if you're working a little bit ahead. So week 5 has night, chapter 10 in it. So I'm going to talk about that in this video, and then I'll make another video for talking about Graham, chapter 4. Both of those are in the second half of the book. Chapter 10 is the second to last chapter, so the readings are getting a little lighter, especially next week. But I think even this week a little lighter than they've been, because you're doing a little more writing. You're doing some comparison contrast short papers on the isms, and you're cranking out once a week your sections of your final paper, which is your final exam, on the the view of this, that, and the next thing in teaching. And I want to make sure that we're on track. So there are slides that deal with just kind of looking at the big picture, kind of keeping track of your, if you're being consistent, I guess, across your view of the student and the teacher and the curriculum. Those are the ones that you have to write yet, I think. So, okay, let me flip over to my PowerPoint, and you can watch this video before. I wonder what happened there. Okay, so the chapter 10 PowerPoint isn't just about night. I talk about the Great Commission in there. I'm going to have some emphasis on that, because I used different parts of the Great Commission, which is in Matthew 28, in a conference presentation last October, which was the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. And I had a paper accepted for a conference kind of commemorating that 500th anniversary. In my paper, I looked at the Great Commission and how it says, therefore go and make disciples. But then what does that mean? It says baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. So a lot of evangelicals focus in on that, especially Baptists. But then it says, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And I think a lot of Calvinists have traditionally focused on the teaching part. So, people with the gift of evangelism maybe bring Christians into the church, new Christians. People with the gift of teaching need to feed them and help them be nurtured spiritually, even after they've been baptized, of course. And then the last sentence of the Great Commission is, surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. And I wondered whether some of the more mainline churches that don't emphasize going and converting people, and don't emphasize as much as maybe we do the heavy emphasis on education and teaching, but maybe maybe some Methodist traditions, for example, would fall under focusing on surely I am with you always, bringing the Holy Spirit's work into culture and into our lives. So that's just one way, just maybe one lens for looking at the view of the student, the view of curriculum, view of education, that if you come from a different Christian traditions, you maybe are looking at the Great Commission in its different emphases, and it says all of those things in it. So it's not like one is wrong and the other is right, and the Christians who have one emphasis over another are bad or good or that kind of thing. We're struggling to figure these things out, right? So anyway, I have a whole chart that kind of lines that out, and I'd like you to take a look at that. So chapter 10 is as you may recall, following the isms, finishing up the isms in Night. And I think he kind of slowly walks you through the necessity of building a personal philosophy of education. Why should you have a philosophy of education? That was chapter 8. Chapter 9, a Christian approach to philosophy. So just put education aside for chapter 9, and just talk about a Christian approach to philosophy. Then he kind of puts those together in chapter 10 for this week, a Christian approach to education. So building your philosophy of education, okay, means building your philosophy and building your Christian philosophy and building and applying it to education. So that's going to go back to what is real. How, in your worldview, how do you know what's real? We're having all kinds of culture wars now where we yell at each other and we say, that's not real, that's not real, that's true, that's not true, that's fake news, that's a lie. And, you're all liars on that side and you're all liars on that side and that kind of stuff, right? I mean, kind of a weird time to be alive, and hopefully we'll kind of calm down and find a way to settle this down without it blowing up too much more. I just hope and pray that can happen, actually. But it kind of boils down to, in my mind, what our view of truth is. How do we know something's true? What's our view of what's real? What are our values? Like, is telling the truth and not lying as a public figure more important than, getting these results? And I think, in our political divide, in our culture wars divides right now, we're slicing our values and we're saying, I'm willing to sacrifice these values for these results, or these values for these results, and different sides and different, people are prioritizing different things. So, take a look at that, be thinking about that, how it applies to education. If you haven't thought much about through lines, take a look at the chart that I put in there about through lines. A lot of Christian schools, a bunch, not most, but a bunch of Christian schools in the CSI Reformed tradition mostly, and more in Canada than the United States, are using through lines or calling it teaching for transformation. So some of the local schools in Sioux County here have gone through training for that, and Dort has taken on the rights to this content to present it in seminars and trainings and that kind of stuff, to try to get it farther out and to more schools than what the owners or writers of this were able to do before. But I think it's really cool because it goes through everything in the school, not just all the content areas. So it not only applies to both English and biology and PE and history, all of those, but it applies to your chapel program and your extracurriculars, your athletic program, all those things. So I'm pretty excited by it. I really think that it's a kind of a cool thing. And I wish it had been around when I was more active in high school teaching and trying to develop and advocate for a more thoroughly Christian faith integration across all the subject areas. But things like Earthkeeper can just run through everything, and Servant Worker can go through everything, and Image Reflector, all of us as the image of God. So just take a look at that and, kind of think through some things there. See if you want to pull some of that into different sections of your paper. And then I'm kind of making some big summaries of my different papers that I'm having you read: the Christianity Against Culture, the Christianity embracing culture model, and then the Christ transforming culture, which I think the Reformed tradition has tried to promote, and how those run through the view of the student and the view of the curriculum, and you still need to write the view of the student, the view of the curriculum, and the view of the teacher. And this week, the theme is more on curriculum in the readings. So that's why we're reading the Graham book a little bit out of order. We did part 5 last week, and now we're doing part 4. So that's going backwards. But he talks about curriculum in part 4. So I saved that till we got to Knight's curriculum example in chapter 10, where he talks about teaching literature from a thoroughly Christian perspective and what that means to him. And then we'll lay the Graham next to that, and you figure out, what you think and how it works in your mind and that kind of stuff. So I hope my charts and my different lenses that I have you look through can help you with that. Okay, so then some questions for you to think about: teaching as ministry, a Christian view of the curriculum. Then go ahead and look at Knight's approach to teaching literature, and I divided it into about 5 steps. And go ahead and pick a different subject area, like music or math, or whatever you want, and see if you can apply each of those 5 steps or 5 components of teaching literature Christianly. See if you can apply that to a different subject area, just so that you can kind of get that, get thinking about that in your mind. And if you're not an education major, maybe think about your major and how the careers associated with that you might end up pursuing. How maybe those 5 aspects of teaching literature Christianly could translate into, dealing with the content of, being a boss in a business, and being a boss Christianly. Okay, so have fun with that, and that's about it. That's all I want to say about chapter 10. I hope it goes well. Like I said, it's not a lot of pages this week compared to some of the larger reading assignments in Knight, and so I'll say goodbye on this video and save it and post it, and then we'll have another video for the Graham book. All right.